What is real, actual democracy? We all know that the things that we want aren't being expressed in the policies passed by our government, for a lot of us at least. In capitalist society, the concept of democracy often falls short, becoming a privilege primarily for the wealthy. This video explores the limitations of capitalist democracy and reveals how true democratic ideals can only be achieved through a socialist framework. We will delve into historical examples and modern insights to understand why economic democracy is paramount for genuine representation and political agency for all. The flawed promise of capitalist democracy. In the United States, we're told there's two parties, the liberals and conservatives, and those are your choices. And, we're led to believe that based on these choices, the policies that we would like to see are gonna be represented by these politicians. Um, but without economic democracy, without the economics of the society which runs everything being democratically run, this choice is only between one party that serves the rich and another party that serves the rich. The lack of democratic workplaces and industries means genuine representation for the majority remains elusive. Lobbying and financial influence. Candidates from both major parties are influenced by lobbying groups and financial support from the elite capitalist ruling class. This system inherently disadvantages movements advocating for policies that benefit the majority. And if you think I'm capping, if you think I'm lying, just keep watching. Decades of Red Scare propaganda have created an environment where socialist or communist labels can derail progressive campaigns. And even when they do succeed, those same democratic socialists or social democrats eventually are swayed and get donations and from lobbying groups to pass policies that are not in the interest of the majority of the population, despite their messaging. Bernie Sanders, Alessandria Ocasio Cortez, both being examples. So here's what I was talking about. I said, if you think I'm lying, this is a direct quote from a peer-reviewed study published by Cambridge University. And they do have charts, which I've seen on other places. You can look that up, and you can see the graphs where it shows you this visually. But basically, analysis indicated multivariate, meaning across multiple different indices, multiple different data points and different avenues of finding this data, that economic elites and organized groups representing business interests have substantial independent impact on U.S. government policy, while average citizens and mass based interest groups have little or no independent influence. I think it was like basically, regardless if the average people support a policy or even mass-based, grassroots organizations, regardless if they support the policy, the chance of the policy having a chance of passing is the same percentage throughout. But the more of the ruling capitalist class supports a bill, the higher chances that bill is going to pass. And this is not a new thing. While capitalist society has only existed for a few hundred years, the property relations we have now, the class society itself has existed for thousands of years. In ancient Athens, we're taught that they were the first democracy, and basically they had us as the same form, the same kind of concept we have now, where it's only for a small amount of people. Women weren't allowed and slaves weren't allowed in the Roman Republic and ancient Athens. Now there are some differences between the two, and they're both great case studies. But in Athens, slaves were, in both of these societies, slaves were the backbone of the economy. How people got money. How the economy was run was based off of slave labor, and none of these slaves were allowed to vote. Okay, no women were allowed to vote. And so for both of these examples, the people who were allowed to vote were people who owned property, people part of official zones, of territory, who were already established. And in the Roman Republic, they had a system where basically the the Senate had the true power, and to become a part of the Senate, you had to already be a magistrate, and so you had to already be established to be part of this small group of people, maybe a few dozen, maybe a few hundred, who had the right to vote amongst themselves on how they're gonna operate, or run the rest of society. And one of the great examples of democracy changing over time. A great example of people who are oppressed by a democracy that claims to be a democracy, but is only democratic in that the few people who are in the elite circle get to decide amongst themselves how they're going to rule the rest of us, is the tribune of the plebs, the plebeian struggle for agency. Basically, to make this really simple, like many societies at the time, Rome started as a city which was a collection of clans. Another word could be tribe, or gens, is another term that's been used. Basically, you had these different family groups, and they came together to consolidate their power and be stronger together. I mean, it's this case as old as time. Civilizations coming together for their collective benefit. Um, and the thing was, when Rome started conquering more surrounding territory, only the people in these original clans, which were in this original line of territory that they threw, even though they occupied surrounding territory, only within the original city, and being an official member of one of these original founding clans gave you right to any political agency at all. And of course, you had to be a male, and you had to be of the property owning class. And so over time, of course, not everybody outside the official city or anyone who's not officially planned, there's going to be wealthy people besides that. So basically, the poor and wealthy citizens of some of these, basically, I would call them provinces outside of Rome, they fought to have the right to be politically represented. And so a whole institution was created, that could pass its own laws, even had veto power. And, you know, if you don't know where I'm going with this, even though the slaves never gained the right to vote, the contradictions within Rome, with the slaves doing everything in society, making the society run, having no say in how it's run. That's always going to create a contradiction of interest between the people who are building the society and the people who are running it. And so, Rome, Athens, all these other places failed. They couldn't work out those contradictions, but Rome did delay its fall by having the tribune of the plebs, by changing its democracy, by changing its political institutions, not because they were benevolent, don't get that from this, but because they recognized that to preserve any power at all, the people who were in charge, they had to make concessions. Because you can look this up. There's actually great documentaries and stuff about this, where the plebeians, the people who lived outside of the city, who weren't part of these clans, they would go on strike. They said, no, we're not paying no taxes anymore. We're not following your rules. We're annexing ourselves. We're no longer part of you. And until the Roman state that gave them that political agency, they didn't come back, and so it's a great example of how, regardless of how immortal we want to see our institutions as, they are not immortal, and we can change them by engaging in struggle for a right for political representation. So, how does this apply to us? While the U.S. has seen expansion of rights, right? We had the Civil Rights Act, where and women's right to vote, which didn't exist upon the founding. Slaves were not allowed to vote. Only white land-owning men were allowed to vote in the founding of the United States. But we still lack permanent institutions representing workers, which are the majority of people in society, because a lot of people, you know, uh, American propaganda tries to tell you that our democracy is so pure and such a good example of democracy because, hey, we let all the races vote. Yeah, pretty much everywhere else in the world does too. We let women vote. Yeah, and these days, pretty much everywhere else in the world does too. But what matters is are the people actually represented? Are their true interests actually represented? And we have to move past uh this idea that just keeping this current institutions without changing the system, creating new institutions that we can solve this, because our system, our so-called democratic system, does not account for economics. What I'm proposing here is, and what socialists around the world are proposing, is that we have a democracy where different people in all industries of labor are represented. We have a democracy where the plumbers all across the country have a union, have a group, and they elect amongst themselves who's going to represent the plumbers in Congress. The electricians, the baristas at Starbucks, the service workers at McDonald's and Burger Kings and other places, the carpenters, all the different fields of labor, the factory owners, not factory workers, and so the goal is for all these places to be democratic, where the workers would democratically vote on how to run their local factory or business that they work in, and then on a national, on a regional, and on a local level, these workers having a certain position in Congress, not just, okay, anyone, regardless of race, can join. It's We have a specific representation for the different fields of labor, and in for our current society today, we need to also even go beyond that. I personally propose a dual democratic system where you have a Congress of different workers and you have a Congress of different marginalized groups. Now, this is similar to the USSR. They had a Council of Soviets, which could be workers, your local neighborhood, or any other collective group of people. Uh, and then they had the Soviets of the other part was the Soviet of nationalities, and they had all the different countries represented, in the Congress. And that was important because Russia was an empire, a feudalist empire before it became a socialist democracy. And so, any of these former occupied nations were given the choice to whether they wanted to join the Soviet Union. And if they voted to join, then they were given a specific number of seats in the Congress of Nationalities, which could be comparable, like what we have in the United States, is the different states, the Senate and the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives is based on population, but the Senate is based on states. Now, the thing is, when America was originally founded, to the white landowning men, this made a little sense because different people okay, I'm a Virginian, I'm a Kentucky, I'm an Ohioan, I'm a Carolinian, and they had different goals in different states. But nowadays, it's not as relevant to truly represent different marginalized groups, which is the purpose of having the Senate in the first place, so that the majority cannot squash the will and the representation of subgroups, that could get marginalized, And so, what I propose is having a Congress of, you would have different racial groups that are marginalized. You would have a number of seats for women who have been for thousands of years suppressed by the patriarchy. You would have, of course, indigenous people who would maybe even have their own institution, you know, and disabled people, maybe certain other mentally ill people, maybe disabled and mentally ill, the same category, but just recognizing that there's different groups within our population that could benefit from being able to have a say in the decisions that are going to affect all of us, you know having the veto power of the indigenous people of America, or the disabled people. If there's a law that's going to affect them, the majority may not even notice or care too much, but to them, they can immediately notice it and use their power in Congress to stop it, because we, if we had that kind of a system. Now, this can be hard to completely wrap your head around. I'm not sure how good this image here explains. You can definitely look that up. But the whole point is we really need to rethink our democratic institutions if we actually want to represent the will of the people. And I know the masses, that's what the masses want. The people in power don't want that. And my goal in this video is to show you that we can even start locally and start making community decisions on a community level. And the goal is to have all these community organizations link up and form one workers' party. And so there is hope that we can actually create a world where we actually have a voice in the big decisions that govern the daily aspects of our lives. And there is a scientific way of going about it, with a long tradition of people all over the world attempting this and doing it in their own ways. So there's some quick common criticisms of socialism and the democracy it brings, through collective control over industries, democratic control over mass industries instead of private control. Um, a lot of We hear this phrase a lot: "You vote with your dollar," and it can be taken a couple ways. The main way I think I hear it said is that, whatever you want to see in the world, spend your money on. Instead of Gandhi, be the change you want to see in the world. The new capitalist branding is, uh, buy the change you want to see in the world. And it's real. Like, people really internalize this and believe that, if only people would put their money towards better things, then we would have a better life. But what's being produced isn't democratically decided in the first place. The media we consume isn't democratic. They're putting all this media and propagandas in our faces that, if you're not constantly checking yourself, it's easy to internalize and then, consume the products, the mindless products they want us to consume, instead of, you know putting our money towards something better. And it's just not practical to blame the individual when the people who have all the money, who have the power with their money to change the world, aren't. They're doing everything they can to just preserve their wealth. Um and the thing is, like, even in, like, corporations that have stockholders and everything, they say, "Oh, all the shareholders." It's not all the shareholders. It's the top shareholders. If you buy one stock of Amazon, you have no democratic even voice. I guarantee you can't even show up at a meeting and speak your mind. Doesn't matter. You have to, I mean, don't quote me on this exact number, but you basically gotta be a multi-millionaire who has a big stake in the company to have any say over that. And even if you have a big stake, if you don't have the majority of stake, a lot of time your say might not count anyways, even if you have 20 or 30%. So no, you don't vote with your dollar, and even if you did, the people with the most dollars get the most votes and therefore have the most power. So if we want a true democracy, it needs to be one person, one vote. Not you can buy, all the votes, because dollar equals one vote. Anyways, one of the biggest criticisms of actually existing socialism, socialist experiments, and socialist states that have existed in the past 100 years is that it just creates a new bureaucratic ruling class within the socialist country. The people at the top of the political apparatus. The problem with this criticism is that when private property is outlawed, you know, the accumulation that can occur does not have the power to oppress. Marx famously says it himself. Communists do not want to deprive any person from um, getting the products of society, from going out there and working, making money, obtaining things, for your hard work. It only wants to stop people from oppressing other people, from making other people subservient to them by that accumulation, meaning it doesn't want to stop you from even getting rich, having a great, prosperous life. But it does want to stop you from using those riches to own a whole industry that many other people work in. It wants those industries to be democratic. It does stop you from owning a whole apartment building that dozens of people live in to survive and have no democratic right and have no guaranteed right to keep living there when the prices rise. Okay, it wants to take away that power. So socialist states that eliminated private property, yes, there were people who were wealthier than others, but it was at a completely different level of disparity than what we have in capitalism because, you know, uh, it would take a while to completely explain it. Maybe I can make more videos explaining it, but the point is that the more wealth when you gain the power to own an industry in capitalism, your wealth can just keep exponentially increasing. And then you have the power to set the wages, manipulate the market. And then you have innovation, and then you own the new machines because you're rich. An average worker can't afford to buy a whole machine and make their own factory. So, as the technology is improving, and 1 hour for the laborer is getting you more and more money. You can keep their wages stagnant, so your profits are going up. Every innovation in the industry is making you more money because your family 150 years ago, you know, got or maybe 200 years ago, your family had slaves. Now, boom, you had a plantation in the 1800s. Now you fucking can go to wherever and buy a factory and then just buy the latest machines, and now you're set. You know what I'm saying? So I'm trying not to go off on a rant, but um the main point is um there has historically and will continue to be disparity in personal income, even in socialist countries. Some people, but it's about equity, right? It's about people who put in, get more, but having a base standard of living for everybody, making sure that housing is a human right, that people have access to food and clothing and other basic necessities. And if they want to go out and work more, and be ambitious, and contribute to the broader welfare, innovate, even. they will be honored more by society and may accumulate more, because they've contributed more, but they don't have the power to turn that around and then begin exploiting other people and keeping them in a cycle of rent and not getting ahead just because now they innovated somehow. So when we hear that capitalism is about a meritocracy, like there's a lot of propaganda about it, even if they don't outright say it. uh, it's really what socialism is a meritocracy. There's a base standard of living for everybody, and the more you put in, the more you're gonna get back. But you're not gonna be homeless and starve to death because you lost your job. Simple as that. So let's reclaim our collective destiny. Let's actually achieve democracy. Socialism aims to create institutions that ensure equitable resource distribution and rights for all working class and oppressed peoples by banning private property and fostering social control over industries. We can dismantle monopolies and empower a truly representative political system. First, first bullet. Workplace representation, a Congress elected from various industries, healthcare, education, logistics, service industry, whatever, would ensure decisions reflect workers' needs. The workers are the masses. We are the majority of people in society. Community representation, a second Congress elected from historically marginalized communities, indigenous, black, Latino, disabled, would ensure their voices are heard. Ending privilege. The dual Congress model would end the automatic privilege of any hegemonic group, fostering genuine democratic participation and shared power. This is not a utopian dream, but a historical development, a necessary evolution towards a society where we all have real agency and a guaranteed quality of life. This is real. Many actually existing socialist states have experimented in different ways at creating democratic institutions that truly reflect the people and truly represent the masses. I'm asking you to join me in this struggle in your local community today on a broader level, wherever you can. Um, Spread this idea of creating real democracy. Join a local community organization, a democratic socialist one, that where people make decisions collectively on how best they can improve their communities and fight for the eventual liberation of all of us. Imagine we start these groups all across the country in our local communities. We bring them all together under one party, and we use this party to take control, politically take control of the government and create a new democratic system that actually represents